Great. Okay, last but not least, we have Tima Bansal. I don't believe she's using slides in this session, and after that, we will, if we have time for discussion among the panelists, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll go right to group discussion. So, Tima, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jamie. First of all, I wanted to say that we decided to go slides, no slides. And listening to the other presenters, I think it's a really hard act to follow. With three wonderful presentations, we put me at the back, partly because I wanted to not just talk about where qualitative research is, but also think about where qualitative research could be going. So a little bit of background, though. I've been doing qualitative research in the context of sustainability. So issues of climate change, inequality, poverty, the big issues for quite some time. And the reason why I do work in this area, which I'm sure many of you do research in the areas that you do, because you really care about it. And what we have a tendency to do when we call something research is to believe that we're somehow different or distanced from the researched. So we're the researcher, and then there's the researched. And this notion of objectivity and this inability to actually change the context, I would argue, is a fiction. And so that I'm going to start my talk with the provocation of two fictions that we have in our research that I think should shape our methods as we go forward. One of those fictions is this fiction of objectivity. And I think that that's a holdover from quantitative researchers. So there's this notion of positivism that we're separate from that which is researched, and that we can all agree on what's being researched, and we will present that as such. But I would suggest that we need to embrace our subjectivity, that we need to recognize that we come in with our biases, that we recognize that things are through our lens. And as Christine said, when we look at things through one lens, we see something, and then we look at it through another lens, we might see something else. And when we look at through different people's lenses, we see something altogether. So I think that we need to recognize that we're subjective and not objective. And the second fiction is that we aren't involved in the context that we're researching. And so there's this belief that we are outsiders, we're looking in, and we're not actually shaping the context. But many of us do shape the context. And I think Lindsay's example of being an Uber driver is a perfect example of the fact that she actually could potentially shape the relationship that she has with the Uber passenger. And so when we're qualitative researchers, we don't step aside from the research context, we're part of it. So if you recognize that, one, that we're subjective and biased, and two, that we actually shape the context, I think that that should affect the way that we approach the research and the way that we write it up. So the first thing I want to say is that we need to embrace the fact that we are subjective and that we do change the context, and that's not a bad thing. And that if we recognize that this is one of the strengths of what we do, that we don't want to be quantitative researchers, but we recognize our biases, and we recognize that influencing the context will actually inform us about the context, that could be something that plays to our strengths. But we have to then do so cautiously. So I want to reinforce another point that was made already, is that we need to very transparently show our data. And so transparency becomes a really critical aspect of what we consider to be good research. And there's a question in the chat about justification. I think it's really important for us to justify the methods that we use, because it's the justification of the methods that we use that gives us the defense, the reliability of us as researchers. But let me go into very specifics, the specifics of what this subjectivity and the fact that we shape our context means in terms of the data collection. When we collect data, I think that's important for us to have three aspects of the data that we collect. There's the aspect of what we saw or what was said. This is the what can we see that everybody else sees. There's a second piece of data that I think that we need to record, and that's how did you feel, or how do I feel as a researcher, or what am I analyzing? So what is it that I'm bringing to the research that I'm seeing? And then the third one is that we need to be much more reflexive about our own biases. So how do my biases, my preferences, my relationships affect the research that I'm actually taking note of? So when we write up our methods, I believe that transparency of what we saw, the actual things that we saw, what we analyze or how we felt about what was going on, then reflexively our biases. If we show that in the methods, I think that they are far more compelling. I would also say that in writing the findings, it's not only important to write the findings in a way that says, this is a show, don't tell, but show this is what we see. But it's in the discussion section that we actually get to talk about our analysis of what we've seen. So if the findings are the show, what everybody else would see, the discussion section is the analysis. I think that in qualitative research, if we don't tell the stories, if we don't bring ourselves into the research, then we make the research less compelling. So if I was to say, what does qualitative research look like when we go forward into the future? I would like to see us as qualitative researchers really embrace the uniqueness of what we do. And I just want to end with one plug, and I know that Jamie is also on this special issue that we're doing for Journal of Management. It's a special issue call that should be coming out in the next week or so. But what we want to do is to recognize the unique aspects of qualitative research. So the call will ask for proposals for qualitative research as opposed to papers. And when you give a proposal, that will allow us to allow the editors to work much more closely with the authors to actually develop that research. Because I think qualitative research is really a different animal than quantitative research. And it's time that we embrace the uniqueness of what we do. That's mine.
That's great, Tima. Thank you so much. And